I'm Brittany, this is Arthur, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch and read gay things. We are continuing our trek through Captive Prince. We read for a couple of hours, we take a break somewhere around in the middle. Please no spoilers in the chat, because, as you may have noticed, there are plenty of new readers in there. There are trigger warnings in the description. And we are on page... Hang on. We... are on, they do that thing where on the page with the actual chapter there are no page numbers, so that's helpful for me. We're on page 127 for chapter 7. We have now seen we've now been introduced to kind of some of the I guess the context would be the gentle way to put it on exactly how sexual behavior and body slaves and all of that kind of work. Sort of what's allowed and what's, not much seems to be not allowed. So, we've seen some examples of how body slaves can be treated. Damon has had contact with a slave that was brought over from Achielos, and he's now prioritizing, his people's needs over his own, which any good leader would do, which is, kind of sad that it feels like a novelty, because that just goes to show you how wanting we are of good leaders in the real world. Anyway, so, seeing no reason whatsoever to cooperate with that order, Damon stood up. It had an interesting effect on the guard, who brought up short and swung his gaze back to Laurent, seeking further guidance. Riddell was also in the room, and at the door stood the two guards who were on watch. Laurent narrowed his eyes at the problem, but offered no immediate solution. Damon said, "You could bring in more men." Behind him were strewn the cushions and rumpled silk sheets, and trailing across the floor was the single chain linked to his wrist cuff that was no impediment to movement at all. "You are really courting danger tonight," Laurent said. "Am I? I thought I was appealing to your better nature." "Order whatever punishment you like from the coward's distance of a chain length. You and Gavar are two of a kind." We all know Laurent has a sharp tongue. He's a little notorious for it. But you can forget just what a sassy, snappy bitch Damon can be when properly provoked. It was not Laurent, but the guard who reacted, steel flashing out of the sheath. "Watch your mouth." He was wearing livery, not armor. The threat was negligible. Damon looked at his drawn sword with scorn. "You're no better. You saw what Gavar was doing. You did nothing to stop him." Laurent raised a hand, halting the guard before he could take another angry step forward. "What was it he was doing?" said Laurent. The guard stepped back, then shrugged. "Raping one of the slaves." There was a pause, but if Laurent had any reaction to these words, it didn't show on his face. Laurent transferred his gaze back to Damon and said pleasantly, "Does that bother you? I recall you being free with your own hands not so very long ago." That was... Damon flushed. He wanted to deny that he'd done anything of the kind, but he remembered rather unequivocally that he had. "I promise you, Gavar did a great deal more than simply enjoy the view." "To a slave," Laurent said. "The prince's guard doesn't interfere with the regency. Gavar can stick his cock into any of my uncles if... Gavar can stick his cock into anything of my uncles he likes." Damon made a sound of disgust. "Disgust. With your blessing." "Why not?" said Laurent. His voice was honeyed. "He certainly had my blessing to fuck you, but it turned out he'd rather take a blow to the head. Disappointing, but I can't fault his taste. Then again, maybe if you had spread in the ring, Gavar wouldn't have been so hot to get inside your friend." Damon said, "This isn't a scheme of your uncle's. I don't take orders from men like Gavar. You're wrong." "Wrong," said Laurent. "How lucky I am to have servants to point out my shortcomings. What makes you think I will tolerate any of this, even if I believed what you are saying to be true?" Because you can end this conversation any time you like. With so much at stake, Damon was sick of certain kinds of exchanges, the kind Laurent favored and enjoyed and was good at. Wordplay for its own sake, words that built traps. None of it meant anything. You're right, I can. Leave us, Laurent said. He was gazing at Damon while he said it, but it was Riddell and the guards who bowed and went out. Very well. Let us play this out. You're concerned for the well-being of the other slaves. Why hand me that kind of advantage? Advantage, said Damon. When someone doesn't like you very much, it isn't a good idea to let them know that you care about something, said Laurent. Damon felt himself turn ashen as the threat sank in. Would it hurt worse than a lashing for me to cut down someone you care for? Said Laurent. Damon was silent. Why do you hate us so much? He almost said, except that he knew the answer to that question. I don't think I need to bring in more men, said Laurent. I think all I have to do is tell you to kneel and you'll do it, without me lifting a finger to help anyone. You're right, said Damon. I can end this any time I like, said Laurent. I haven't even begun. Yeah, that's a rough way to learn that you don't just hand blueprints over to the enemy. That's a scene break. Ooh. The prince's orders, Damon was told the next day, as he was stripped and redressed. And when he asked what these preparations were for, he was told that tonight he would serve the prince at the high table. Riddell, clearly disapproving of the fact that Damon was being taken into refined company, delivered, a peripatetic lecture. Excellent word usage. I've noticed that, a few times. Every now and then she'll pepper in a really, really great word. Delivered a peripatetic lecture, striding up and down in Damon's room. Few pets were invited to serve their masters at the high table. To offer him this opportunity, the prince must see something in Damon that surpassed Riddell's understanding. It was pointless to instruct someone like Damon in the rudiments of polite etiquette, but he should try to keep silent, obey the prince, and refrain from attacking or molesting anyone. In Damon's experience, being taken out of his rooms at Laurent's request did not end well. His 3 excursions had comprised the ring, the gardens, and the baths, with a subsequent trip to the flogging post. His back was by now mostly healed, but that was of no consequence. The next time Laurent struck out, it would not be directly at him. Damon had very little power, but there was a crack that ran right down the middle of this court. If Laurent would not be persuaded, Damon must turn his attention to the regent's faction. Out of habit, he observed the security outside of his room. They were on the 2nd floor of the palace, and the passage they walked along had a number of windows fretted by grills, looking out on an uninviting sheer drop. They also passed a number of armed men, all wearing the livery of the prince's guard. Here were the guards that had been absent from the pet residences. A surprising number of men. They could not all be here for his benefit. Did Laurent keep this kind of security about him all the time? They passed through a pair of ornate bronze doors, and Damon realized that he had been brought into Laurent's own chambers. Damon's eyes raked the interior derisively. These rooms were everything he would have expected of a princeling pampered lavishly, extravagantly, beyond reason. Decoration overran everything. The tiles were patterned, the walls intricately carved. The vantage was enchanting. This 2nd-floor chamber had a loggia of semicircular arches that hung above gardens. It might be loggia. Through an archway, the bedchamber could be seen. The bed was swathed in sumptuous curtains, a panoply of luxurious embellishment and carved wood. All that was missing was a rumpled, perfumed trail of clothing strewn across the floor, and a pet lounging on one of the silk-draped surfaces. There was no such evidence of habitation. In fact, amid the opulence, there were only a few personal effects. Close to Damon was a reclining couch and a book, fanned open, revealing illuminated pages and scroll-work glinting with gold leaf. The leash Damon had worn in the gardens also lay on the couch, as though tossed there casually. Laurent emerged from the bedchamber. He had not yet closed the delicate band that collared his shirt, and white laces trailed, exposing the hollow of his throat. When he saw that Damon had arrived, he paused beneath the archway. "Leave us," said Laurent. He spoke to the handlers who had brought Damon to this chamber. They freed Damon from his restraints and departed. Stand up, said Laurent. Damon stood. He was taller than Laurent and physically stronger, and wearing no restraints at all. And they were alone together, as they had been last night, as they had been in the baths. But something was different. He realized that at some point he had begun to think of being alone in a room with Laurent as dangerous. Laurent detached himself from the doorway. As he drew close to Damon, his expression soured, his blue eyes curdled with distaste. Laurent said, "There is no bargain between us. A prince does not make deals with slaves and insects. Your promises are worth less to me than dirt. Do you understand me?" "Perfectly," said Damon. Laurent was staring at him coldly. "Torvald of Patras may be persuaded to request that the slaves go with him to Bazal? Believe it's Bazal. To Bazal, as part of the trade deal being negotiated with my uncle." Damon felt his brow furrow. This information did not make sense. "If Torvald insists strongly enough, I think my uncle will agree to some sort of loan, or more accurately, a permanent arrangement couched as a loan, so that it will not offend our allies in Achelous. It's my understanding that patron sensibilities regarding the treatment of slaves are similar to your own." "They are." "I have spent the afternoon seeding the idea with Torvald. The deal will be finalized tonight. You will accompany me to the entertainments. It is my uncle's custom to conduct business in relaxed surroundings," said Laurent. "But," said Damon, "but," icily. Damon rethought that particular approach. He turned over the information he'd just been given, re-examined it, turned it over again. "What changed your mind?" Damon said, carefully. Laurent didn't answer him, just looked at him with hostility. "Don't speak, unless you're asked a question. Don't contradict anything I say. These are the rules. Break them, and I will joyfully leave your countrymen to rot. And then, bring me the leash." The staff to which the leash was affixed had the heavy weight of pure gold. The fragile chain was intact. It had neither been repaired nor replaced. Repaired or replaced. Damon picked it up, not very quickly. "I'm not sure I believe anything you've just told me," Damon said. "Do you have a choice?" "No." Laurent had closed the lacings on his shirt, and the picture he now presented was immaculate. "Well, put it on," he said, with a touch of impatience. The leash, he meant. Torvald of Patras was in the palace to negotiate a trade agreement. That much was true. Damon had heard the news from several sources. He remembered Van discussing the patron delegation several nights ago in the garden. Patras had a culture similar to that of Achelous. That also was true. Perhaps the rest followed. If a consignment of slaves was on offer, Torvald would conceivably bargain for them, knowing their value. It might be true. Perhaps. Maybe. Might. Laurent was not feigning any change of heart or warmth of feeling. His wall of contempt was firmly in place, was even more evident than usual, as though this act of benevolence was forcing all his considerable dislike to the surface. Damon found that the necessity of winning Laurent over to his cause was giving way to the sobering realization that he had put the fate of the others into the hands of a volatile, malicious man he did not trust and could not predict nor understand. He felt no new rush of warmth for Laurent. He was not inclined to believe that cruelty delivered with one hand was redeemed by a caress from the other, if that's even what this was. Nor was he naive enough to think that Laurent was acting out of any altruistic impulse. Laurent was doing this for some twisty reason of his own. If it was true. Another impeccable thing about the characterization of this series is that Damon has a short list of things that he's good at and a short list of things that he's not good at. And I love the way there's a line there. There's a very realistic line there of he's not an idiot about machinations. Not completely. He's just not at the level that Laurent and most of Vert is at. So there's still a learning curve and he's still out of his depth, but he's not written so that he doesn't understand anything, which I think is a trap that a lot of writers can fall into. In that if someone is super smart, then the other one has to be super stupid, even past all reason. Because someone in Damon's position wouldn't be a total idiot about certain things. But it's really easy to go for that, what you're thinking is really interesting contrast between characters, and you wind up with something that's a bit frustrating because you know that this person would not be like that stupid or that naive. It's like he knows he's not naive enough to fully trust this, but he's also not clever enough and also possibly lacking enough information to be able to see exactly what Laurent's game is. He just knows that one is there. It's very, very well drawn. When the leash was affixed, Laurent took hold of the handler's staff and said, "You're my pet. You outrank others. You do not need to submit to the orders of anyone except myself and my uncle. If you blurt out tonight's plans to him, he will be very, very annoyed with me, which you might enjoy, but you won't like my riposte. It's your choice, of course." Of course. Laurent paused on the threshold. One more thing. They were standing beneath a high arch, which threw shadows on Laurent's face and made it difficult to read. It was a moment before he spoke. "Be careful of Nicaise, and the pet you saw with Councillor Audin. You rejected him in the ring, and that is not a slight he is likely to forget." "Councillor Audin's pet? The child?" Incredulous. "Don't underestimate him because of his age. He has experienced things many adults have not, and his mind is no longer that of a child. Though even a child may learn how to manipulate an adult. And you're mistaken. Councillor Audin is not his master. Nicaise is dangerous." "He's 13 years old," said Damon, and found himself subjected to Laurent's long-lidded gaze. "Is there anyone at this court who isn't my enemy?" "Not if I can help it," Laurent said. That was a scene break. "So he's tame," said Etienne, and reached out tentatively, as though to pat a wild animal. It was a question of which part of the animal he was patting. Damon knocked his hand away. Etienne gave a yelp and snatched his hand back, nursing it against his chest. "Not that tame," said Laurent. He didn't reprimand Damon. He didn't seem particularly displeased with barbaric behavior as long as it was directed outward, like a man who enjoys owning an animal who will rake others with its claws, but eat peacefully from his own hand. He was giving his pet a great deal of license. As a result, courtiers kept one eye on Damon, giving him a wide berth. Laurent used that to his advantage, using the propensity of courtiers to fall back in reaction to Damon's presence as a means of extricating himself smoothly from conversation. The third time this happened, Damon said, "Shall I make a face at the ones you don't like, or is it enough to just look like a barbarian?" "Shut up," said Laurent calmly. It was said that the Empress of Vask kept 2 leopards tied up by her throne. Damon tried not to feel like one of them. Before the negotiations, there were to be entertainments. Before the entertainments, a banquet. Before the banquet, this reception. There were not as many pets as there had been at the ring, but Damon did see 1 or 2 familiar faces. Across the room he saw a flash of red hair, found a pair of emerald eyes. Ansel uncurled himself from his master's arm, pressed fingers to his lips, and blew Damon a kiss. The patron delegation, when they arrived, were obvious from the cut of their clothes. Laurent greeted Torvald like an equal, which he was, almost. In negotiations of consequence, it was common to send a man of high birth to act as ambassador. Torvald was Prince Torvald, younger brother of King Torgeir of Patras, though in his case, younger was relative. Torvald was a handsome man in his 40s, close to twice Damon's age. He had a neatly trimmed brown beard in the patron style, brown hair still largely untouched by gray. Relations between Achilleos and Patras were friendly and extensive, but Prince Torvald and Prince Damianos had never met. Torvald had spent most of the last 18 years on Patras's northern border in dealings with the Vaskian Empire. Damon knew of him by reputation. Everyone knew of him. He had distinguished himself in the campaigns to the north when Damon was still in swaddling. He was 5th in line to inherit, after the king's litter of 3 sons and a daughter. Torvald's brown eyes grew markedly warm and appreciative when he looked at Laurent. "Torvald," said Laurent, "I'm afraid my uncle is delayed. While we wait, I thought you could join my pet and me for some air on the balcony." Damon thought Laurent's uncle probably wasn't delayed. He reconciled himself to an evening of listening to Laurent lying a great deal about everything. I'd be delighted, said Torvald, with real pleasure, and gestured for one of his own servants to accompany them also. They strolled together in a small party, Laurent and Torvald in front, and Damon and the servant following a few steps behind. The balcony had a bench for courtiers to recline on and a shadowed alcove for servants to discreetly retire to. Damon, his proportions suited to battle, was not built to be discreet, but in more ways than one. But if Laurent insisted on dragging him about by the neck, he could suffer the intrusion or find a balcony with a bigger alcove. It was a warm night, and the air was perfumed with all the beauty of the gardens. Conversation unfolded easily between the two men, who surely had nothing at all in common. But of course, Laurent was good at talking. What news from Akielos? Laurent asked Torvald at one point. You were there recently. Damon looked at him, startled. Laurent being Laurent, the topic was not an accident. From anyone else it would have been kindness. He couldn't help his pulse quickening at his first word of home. Have you ever visited the capital, at Ios? Asked Torvald. Laurent shook his head. It's very beautiful, a white palace built high on the cliffs to command the ocean. On a clear day you can look out and see Isthema. Isthema? I believe so. Across the water. But it was a dark place when I arrived. The whole of the city was still in mourning for the old king and his son. That terrible business. And there were some factional disputes among the Kiroi. Kiroi? That's a question. Go and write that down. Kiroi or Kiroi? The beginnings of conflict, dissent. Theomedes united them, said Laurent. You don't think Castor can do the same? Perhaps. His legitimacy is an issue. One or two of the... We'll go with Kiroi. Have royal blood running through their veins. Not as much as Castor, but gotten inside of a marriage bed. That situation breeds discontent. What impression did you have of Castor? Asked Laurent. A complicated man, said Torvald. Born in the shadow of a throne, but he does have many of the qualities needed in a king. Strength, judiciousness, ambition. Is ambition needed in a king? Said Laurent. Or is it simply needed to become king? Laurent out here dropping the real questions. After a pause, I heard those rumors too, that the death of Damianos was no accident. But I don't credit them. I saw Castor in his grief. It was genuine. It cannot have been an easy time for him, to have lost so much and gained so much, all in the space of a moment. That is the fate of all princes destined for a throne, said Laurent. Again! Laurent out here just dropping... Woo! Torvald favored Laurent with another of those long, admiring looks that were starting to come with grating frequency. Damon frowned. Laurent was a nest of scorpions in the body of one person. Torvald looked at him and saw a buttercup. Ha! A nest of scorpions in the body of one person. Whew! The accuracy. To hear that Akielos was weakened was as painful as Laurent must have meant it to be. Damon's mind tangled with the thought of factional disputes and dissent. If there was unrest, it would come first from the northern provinces. Sicyon? Sicyon, maybe, and Delpha. The arrival of a servant, trying not to show that he was out of breath, forestalled whatever Torvald might have said next. Your Highness, forgive my interruption. The regent sends that he is awaiting you inside. I've kept you to myself too long, said Laurent. I wish we had more time together, said Torvald, showing no inclination to rise. At least, in that way. The regent's face, when he saw the two princes enter the room together, was a series of unsmiling lines, though his greeting to Torvald was genial, and all the right formalities were exchanged. Torvald's servant bowed and departed. It was what etiquette demanded, but Damon could not follow his example, not unless he was prepared to wrench the leash bodily out of Laurent's hand. Formalities done, the regent said, Could you excuse my nephew and me for a moment? His gaze came to rest heavily on Laurent. It was Torvald's turn to withdraw, good-naturedly. Damon assumed that he was to do the same, but he felt Laurent's grip tighten subtly on the leash. Nephew, you were not invited to these discussions. And yet here I am. It's very irritating, isn't it? Said Laurent. The regent said, "This is serious business between men. It's no time for childish games." "I seem to recall being told to take on more responsibility," said Laurent. "It happened in public, with a great deal of ceremony. If you don't remember it, check your ledgers. You came out of it richer by 2 estates and enough revenue to choke every horse in the stables." If I thought you were here to take on responsibility, I'd welcome you to the table with open arms. You have no interest in trade negotiations. You've never applied yourself seriously to anything in your life. Haven't I? Well, then it's nothing serious, uncle. You have no cause to worry. Damon saw the regent's eyes narrow. It was an expression that reminded him of Laurent. But the regent said only, "I expect appropriate behavior," before preceding them to the entertainments, displaying far more patience than Laurent deserved. Laurent didn't follow immediately. His gaze stayed on his uncle. "Your life would be a lot easier if you stopped baiting him," said Damon. This time, coldly, flatly, "I told you to shut up." Damon learns. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page 143. Yeah, we're on page 143 for chapter 8. Whew. Expecting a slave's inconspicuous place on the sidelines, Damon was surprised to find himself seated beside Laurent, albeit with a cool distance of 9 inches interposed between them. He wasn't sitting half in his lap, as Ansel was with his master across the way. Laurent sat consciously well. He was dressed severely as always, though his clothing was very fine, as befitting his rank. No jewelry except for a fine gold circlet on his brow that was mostly hidden by the fall of his golden hair. When they sat, he unclipped Damon's leash, wound it around the handler's rod, then tossed it to one of the attendants, who managed to catch it with only a slight fumble. The table stretched out. On the other side of Laurent sat Torvald, evidence of a small coup for Laurent. On the other side of Damon was Nicaise, possibly also evidence of a coup for Laurent. Nicaise was separated from Councillor Audin, who sat elsewhere, close by the regent. Nicaise didn't seem to have a master anywhere near him. It seemed like a blunder of etiquette to have Nicaise at the high table, considering the sensibilities of the patrons. I still haven't decided if it's patrons sounds better. But Nicaise was dressed respectably and wore very little paint. The only flash of pet gaudiness was a long earring in his left ear. Twin sapphires dangled, almost brushing his shoulder, too heavy for his young face. In every other way, he could be mistaken for a member of the nobility. No one from Patras... See, I can't decide from one to the next. My brain... Patras, goddamn. No one from Patras would suppose that a child catamite sat at a table alongside royalty. Torvald would likely make the same incorrect assumption Damon had made and think that Nicaise was somebody's son or nephew, despite the earring. Nicaise also sat well. His beauty at close range was striking. So was his youth. His voice when he spoke was unbroken. It had the clear, fluting tone of a knife tapped against crystal, without cracks. Damn! Description moment. Hang on. It had the clear, fluting tone of a knife tapped against crystal, without cracks. We're just going to sit here in awe for a second. Jesus. "I don't want to sit next to you," said Nicaise. "Fuck off." Instinctively, Damon looked around to see if anyone from the patron... God! You know, we're just gonna go with it. From the patron delegation had heard, but no one had. The first course of meat had arrived, and the food had everyone's attention. Nicaise had picked up a gilt 3-pronged fork, but had paused before sampling the dish in order to speak. The fear he'd shown of Damon at the ring seemed to still be there. His knuckles, clenched around the fork, were white. Here's a really good glimpse into my brain. Okay, I've read this series several times. I have always pronounced it incorrectly in my head as Nicaise, not Nicaise. I have looked over the pronunciation guide, very helpfully provided to me again, and I was like, oh, it's Nikkei's, not ni, not na. I was like, oh, fine. I have made that change beautifully in my head. Can I remember from one paragraph to the next if I've been pronouncing it Patris or Patris or what have you? No. And that's what it's like up here. Wait, did I get there or not? See? And see, now I'm having a moment where I can't even remember if I just read this paragraph or not. If we're rereading this, I apologize. Instinctively, Damon looked around to see if anyone from the patron delegation had heard, but no one had. The first course of meat had arrived, and the food had everyone's attention. Nikkei's had picked up a gilt three-pronged fork, but had paused before sampling the dish in order to speak. The fear he'd shown of Damon at the ring seemed to still be there. His knuckles, clenched around the fork, were white. "It's all right," said Damon. He spoke to the boy as gently as he could. "I'm not going to hurt you." Nikkei stared back at him. His huge blue eyes were fringed like a whore's, or like a doe's. Around them, the table was a colored wall of voices and laughter. Courtiers caught up in their own amusements, paying them no attention. "Good," said Nikkei, and stabbed the fork viciously into Damon's thigh under the table. Even through a layer of cloth, it was enough to make Damon start and instinctively grab the fork as 3 drops of blood welled up. "Excuse me a moment," Laurent said smoothly, turning from Torvald to face Nikkei. "I made your pet jump," said Nikkei, smugly. Not sounding at all displeased. "Yes, you did. Whatever you're planning, it's not going to work." "I think it will, though. Bet you your earring." "If I win, you wear it," said Nikkei. Laurent immediately lifted his cup and inclined it towards Nikkei in a little gesture sealing the bet. Damon tried to shake the bizarre impression that they were enjoying themselves. Nikkei waved an attendant over and asked for a new fork. Without a master to entertain, Nikkei was left free to prick at Damon. He began with a stream of insults and explicit speculation about Damon's sexual practices, pitched in a voice too quiet for anyone else to hear. When, at length, he saw that Damon was not rising to this bait, he turned his commentary on Damon's owner. "You think sitting at the high table with him means something? It doesn't. He won't fuck you. He's frigid." This subject was almost a relief. No matter how crude the boy was, there was nothing he could say about Laurent's proclivities that Damon had not already heard speculated about extensively and in coarse language by bored guards on indoor duty. "I don't think he can. I think it doesn't work, what he has. When I was younger, I used to think he'd cut it off. What do you think? Have you seen it?" "When he was younger?" Damon said, "He hasn't had it cut off." Nikkei's eyes narrowed. Damon said, "How long have you been a pet in this court?" 3 years, said Nikkei, in the sort of tone that said, "You won't last here 3 minutes." It just gets worse. It just gets worse with Nikkei. Damon looked at him and wished he hadn't asked. Whether he had a child's mind or not, physically Nikkei had not yet crossed over from child to adolescent. He was still prepubescent. He looked younger than any of the other pets Damon had seen at this court, all of whom had at least passed puberty. 3 years. The patron delegation continued oblivious. With Torvald, Laurent was on his best behavior. He had apparently, incredibly, divested himself of malice and washed his mouth out with soap. He talked intelligently about politics and about trade, and if every now and then a little edge glimmered, it came across his wit. Not barbed, just enough to say, "You see, I can keep up." Torvald showed less and less inclination to look at anyone else. It was like watching a man smile as he surrendered himself to drown in deep water. Thankfully, it did not go on too long. In a miracle of restraint, there were only 9 courses, served ribboned and artfully arranged on jeweled plates by attractive pages. The pets themselves served not at all. sitting nestled alongside their owners. Some of them were hand-fed, and one or two even brazenly helped themselves, playfully filching choice morsels from their masters, like pampered lapdogs who have learned that whatever they do, their doting owners will find them charming. "It's a shame I haven't been able to arrange for you to view the slaves," said Laurent, as the pages began to cover the table with sweets. "You don't need to. We saw palace slaves in Achielos. I don't think I've ever seen slaves of that quality, even in Bazal. And I trust your taste, of course." "I'm glad," said Laurent. Damon was aware that beside him, Nicaise had started intently listening. "I'm sure my uncle will agree to the exchange if you push for it strongly enough," said Laurent. "If he does, I will owe it to you," said Torvald. Nicaise got up from the table. Damon bridged the 9 chilly inches at the first opportunity. "What are you doing? You were the one who warned me about Nicaise." He spoke in a low voice. Laurent went very still. Then he deliberately shifted in his seat and leaned in, bringing his lips right to Damon's ear. "I think I'm out of stabbing range. He's got short arms. Or perhaps he'll try to throw a sugar plum? That is difficult. If I duck, he'll hit Torvald." Damon gritted his teeth. "You know what I meant. He heard you. He's going to act. Can't you do something about it?" "I'm occupied." "Then let me do something." "Bleed on him," said Laurent. Damon opened his mouth to reply and found his words stopped by the startling touch of Laurent's fingers against his lips, a thumb brushing his jawline. It was the sort of absent touch that any master at the table might give to a pet. But from the shocked reaction that rolled over the courtiers at the table, it was clear that Laurent did not do this sort of thing often, or ever. "My pet was feeling neglected," Laurent apologized to Torvald. "He's the captive caster sent you to train?" said Torvald curiously. "He's safe." "He looks combative, but he's really very docile and adoring," said Laurent. "Like a puppy." "A puppy," said Torvald. To demonstrate, Laurent picked up a confection of crushed nuts and honey and held it out to Damon as he had at the ring, between thumb and forefinger. "Sweetmeat," said Laurent. In the stretched-out moment that followed, Damon thought explicitly about killing him. Damon leaned in. It was sickly sweet. He didn't let his lips touch Laurent's fingers. A great many people were looking at them. Laurent washed his fingers fastidiously in the gold washing bowl when he was done and dried them on a little square cloth of silk. Torvald stared. In Patras, slaves fed masters, peeling fruit and pouring drinks, not the other way around. It was that way also in Achielos. The conversation recovered from its pause and turned to trivial matters. Around them, the creations of sugar and candied spices and glazed pastries in fantastical shapes were slowly being demolished. Damon looked around for Nicaise, but the boy had gone. Another scene break. In the relaxed end-of-meal lull before the entertainments, Damon was given free rein to wander about, and went to find him. Laurent was occupied, and for the first time there were not 2 guards looming perpetually over him. He could have walked out. He could have walked right out of the palace doors and from there into the surrounding city of Arles. Except he couldn't leave this place until Torvald's embassy departed with the slaves, which was, of course, the only reason he was off the leash at all. He didn't make very good progress. The guards might be gone, but Laurent's caress had bought Damon another type of attention. "I predicted when the prince brought him to the ring that he was going to become quite popular," Ven was saying to the noblewoman beside her. "I saw him perform in the gardens, but it was almost a waste of his talents. The prince wouldn't let him take an active role." Damon's attempts to excuse himself had no impact on her at all. "No, don't leave us just yet. Talik wished to meet you," Ven told Damon. She was saying to the noblewoman, "Of course, the idea of one of us keeping males is grotesque. But if one could, don't you think he and Talik would make a good matched pair? Ah, here she is. We'll give you 2 a moment together." They were departing. "I am Talik," the pet declared. Her voice carried the strong accent of Vertan, the eastern province of Vask. Damon recalled someone saying that Van liked pets who could sweep the ring competitions. Talik was almost as tall as Damon, her bare arms well muscled. There was something slightly predatory about her gaze, her wide mouth, and the arc of her brows. Damon had assumed that pets, like slaves, were sexually submissive to their masters, as was the custom in Achielos, but he could only guess at the arrangements between Ven and this woman in bed. She said, I think a warrior from Vertan would easily kill a warrior from Achielos. I think it would depend on the warrior, he said, carefully. She appeared to consider him along with his answer, and eventually to find both acceptable. She said, We are waiting. Ansel will perform. He is popular, in fashion. You've had him. She didn't wait for him to confirm this statement. How was he? Well instructed. Damon's mind supplied the answer, sly as a suggestion murmured in his ear. He frowned at it. He said, Adequate. Talik said, His contract with Lord Berenger ends soon. Ansel will seek a new contract, a high bidder. He wants money, status. He's foolish. Lord Berenger may offer less money, but he is kind, and never puts pets into the ring. Ansel has made many enemies. In the ring, someone will scratch his green eyes out. An accident. Damon was drawn in against his will. That's why he's chasing royal attention. He wants the prince to, he tried out the unfamiliar vocabulary, offer for his contract? The prince, said Talik scornfully. Everyone knows the prince does not keep pets. None at all, said Damon. She said, You. She looked him up and down. Perhaps the prince has a taste for men, not these painted Veretian boys who squeal if you pinch them. Her tone suggested that she approved of this on general principle. Nicaise, said Damon, since they were speaking of painted Veretian boys. I was looking for Nicaise. Have you seen him? Talik said, There. Across the room, Nicaise had reappeared. He was speaking into the ear of Ansel, who had to bend almost in half to reach the little boy's level. When he was done, Nicaise made straight for Damon. Kind of a fan of Talik, not gonna lie. Kinda like her. Did the prince send you? You're too late, said Nicaise. Too late for what? Was the reply in any court except this one. He said, if you've hurt any one of them. You'll what? Nicaise was smirking. You won't. You don't have time. The regent wants to see you. He sent me to tell you. You should hurry. You're keeping him waiting. Another smirk. He sent me ages ago. Damon stared at him. Well, off you go, said Nicaise. It was possibly a lie, but he couldn't risk the offense if it wasn't. He went. It wasn't a lie. The regent had summoned him, and when he arrived, the regent dismissed all those around him, so that Damon was alone at his chair. At the end of the softly lit hall, it was a private audience. Around them, heavy with food and wine, the noise of the court was warm and loosened. Damon made all the deferences that protocol required. The regent spoke. I suppose it excites a slave to plunder the treasures of a prince. You have taken my nephew. Damon stayed very still. He tried not to disturb the air when he breathed. No, Your Highness. The other way around, perhaps. No. Yet you eat out of his hand. The last time I spoke to you, you wished him flogged. How else do you account for the change? You won't like my riposte, Laurent had said. Damon said, carefully, I'm in his service. I have that lesson written on my back. The regent gazed at him for a while. I'm almost disappointed, if it's no more than that. Laurent could benefit from a steadying influence, someone close to him with his best interests at heart. A man with sound judgment, who could help guide him without being swayed. Swayed, said Damon. My nephew is charming, when he wishes it. His brother was a true leader. He could inspire extraordinary loyalty from his men. Laurent has a superficial version of his brother's gifts, which he uses to get his own way. If anyone could have a man eating from the hand that struck him, it's my nephew, said the regent. Where is your loyalty? And Damon understood that he was not being asked a question. He was being given a choice. He badly wanted to step across the chasm that separated the two factions of this court. On the other side was this man who had long since won his respect. It was grittily painful for him to realize that it was not in his nature to do that, not while Laurent was acting on his behalf. If Laurent was acting on his behalf, even if Laurent was acting on his behalf, he had so little stomach for the drawn-out game that was being played tonight. And yet... "I'm not the man you want," he said. "I don't have influence over him. I'm not close to him. He has no love for Archelos, or its people." The regent gave him another long, considering look. "You are honest. That is pleasing. As for the rest, we will see. That will do for now," said the regent. "Go and fetch me my nephew. I prefer him not to be left alone with Torvald." "Yes, your highness." He wasn't sure why it felt like a reprieve, but it did. A few inquiries made of other servants, and Damon learned that Laurent and Torvald had retreated once again to one of the balconies, escaping the stifling crush inside the palace. Reaching the balcony, Damon slowed. He could hear the sound of their voices. He looked back at the thronging court chamber. He was out of sight of the regent. If Laurent and Torvald were discussing trade negotiations, it would be better to delay a little and give them whatever extra time they might need. "Told my advisors that I was past the age to be distracted by beautiful young men," he heard Torvald say, and it was suddenly eminently clear that they were not discussing trade negotiations. It was a surprise, but on reflection it had been happening all night. That a man of Torvald's honorable reputation would choose Laurent as the object of his affections was difficult to swallow, but perhaps Torvald admired reptiles. Curiosity blossomed. There had been no topic that engendered more speculation than this one among courtiers and members of the Prince's Guard alike. Damon paused and listened. "And then I met you," said Torvald. "And then I spent an hour in your company." "More than an hour," said Laurent. "Less than a day. I think you get distracted more easily than you admit." "And you not at all?" There was a slight pause in the rhythm of their exchange. "You have been listening to gossip." "Is it true, then?" "That I am not easily courted? It can't be the worst thing you heard about me." "By far the worst, from my perspective." It was said warmly and won a breath of insubstantial amusement from Laurent. Torvald's voice changed, as though they stood closer together. "I have heard a great deal of gossip about you, but I judge as I find," Laurent said in the same intimate voice. "And what do you find?" Damon stepped forward determinedly. Hearing his footfall, Torvald started and looked around. In Patras, there it is. Thank you. In Patras, affairs of the heart or of the body were usually private. Laurent reclined elegantly against the balustrade, did not react at all except to shift his gaze in Damon's direction. They were indeed standing close together, not quite kissing distance. "Your Highness, your uncle has sent for you," said Damon. "Again," said Torvald, a line appearing in the middle of his forehead. Laurent detached himself. "He's overprotective," he said. The line disappeared when Torvald looked at Laurent. "You took your time," Laurent murmured as he passed Damon. He was left alone with Torvald. It was peaceful out here on the balcony. The court sounds were muted, as though they were very distant. Louder and more intimate were the sounds of insects in the gardens below, and the slow back and forth of greenery. At some point it occurred to Damon that he was supposed to have lowered his eyes. Torvald's attention was elsewhere. "He is a prize," said Torvald warmly. "I'll wager you never thought a prince could be jealous of a slave. Right now I would exchange places with you in a heartbeat." Ooh, bold! That's some bold shit for him to be saying right now. "You don't know him," thought Damon. "You don't know anything about him. You've known him one night." "I think the entertainment will begin shortly," Damon said. "Yes, of course," said Torvald, and they followed Laurent back to the court. Scene break. Damon had, in his life, been required to sit through many spectacles. In Vere, entertainment had taken on new meaning. When Ansel came forward holding a long stick in his hands, Damon readied himself for the kind of performance that would make the patron delegation faint. Then Ansel touched each end of the stick to the torch in the wall bracket, and they burst into flame. It was a kind of fire dance in which the stick was thrown and caught, and the flame, tossed and twirled, created sinuous shapes, circles, and ever-moving patterns. Ansel's red hair created a pleasing aesthetic alongside the red and orange fire. And even without the hypnotic movement of the flame, the dance was beguiling, its difficulties made to look effortless, its physicality subtly erotic. Damon looked at Ansel with new respect. This performance required training, discipline, and athleticism, which Damon admired. It was the first time that Damon had seen Varetian pets display skill in anything other than wearing clothes or climbing on top of one another. The mood was relaxed. Damon was back on the leash, being used very possibly as a chaperone. Laurent was acting with the carefully bland manners of one trying to politely manage a difficult suitor. Damon thought with some amusement, boxed in by your own cleverness. As Damon watched, Torvald's servant produced a peach, then a knife, then cut a slice at Torvald's instruction, offering it to Laurent, who blandly accepted. When he had finished the morsel, the servant brought forth a little cloth from his sleeve with a flourish for Laurent to clean his immaculate fingers. The cloth was transparent silk, edged in gold thread. Laurent returned it crumpled. "I'm enjoying the performance," Damon couldn't resist saying. "Torvald's servant is better supplied than you are," was all Laurent said. "I don't have sleeves to carry handkerchiefs in," said Damon. "I wouldn't mind being given a knife." "Or a fork," said Laurent. A ripple of applause and a small commotion forestalled a reply. The flame dance was finished, and something was happening at the far end of the room. Balking like a green colt at the rein, Erasmus was being dragged forward by a Varetian handler. He heard a girl's fluting voice say, "Since you like them so much, I thought we could watch one of the slaves from Achelous perform." It was Nicaise, here on the small matter of an earring. Torvald was shaking his head, congenially enough. "Laurent," he said, "you've been swindled by the king of Achelous. That can't be a palace slave. He isn't showing form at all. He can't even sit still. I think Castor just dressed up some serving boys and shipped them off to you. Although he is pretty," said Torvald, and then in a slightly different voice, "very pretty." He was very pretty. He was exceptional even among slaves chosen to be exceptional, hand-picked to be served up to a prince. Except he was clumsy and graceless and showing no sign of training. He had finally dropped to his knees, but he looked like he was staying there only because his limbs had seized up, his hands clenched as though cramped. "Pretty or not, I can't take 24 untrained slaves back with me to Bazal." That goddamn, me and pronunciations today, Torvald was saying. Damon took Nicaise by the wrist. "What have you done?" "Let go, I haven't done anything," said Nicaise. He rubbed his wrist when Damon released it. To Laurent, "You let him speak to his betters like that?" "Not to his betters," said Laurent. Nicaise flushed at that. Ansel was still lazily twirling the fire stick. The flickering of the flames cast an orange light. The heat, when it came near, was surprising. Erasmus had turned white, as though about to vomit in front of everyone. "Stop this," said Damon to Laurent. "It's cruel. That boy was badly burned. He's afraid of the fire." "Burned?" said Torvald. Nicaise said quickly, "Not burned, branded. He has the scars all over his leg. They're ugly." Torvald was looking at Erasmus, whose eyes were glassy and showed a kind of stupefied hopelessness. If you knew what he thought he was facing, it was hard to believe he was kneeling down, waiting for it. Torvald said, "Have the fire put out." The sudden acrid smell of smoke drowned out the Varetian perfumes. The fire was out. Summoned forward, Erasmus managed a slightly better prostration and seemed to calm further in the presence of Laurent, which made little sense until Damon recalled that Erasmus had thought of Laurent as kind. Torvald asked Erasmus several questions, which Erasmus answered in with shy but improving form. After that, Torvald's fingers somehow found their way to rest for a moment protectively on the top of Erasmus's head. After that, Torvald asked Erasmus to sit beside him during the trade negotiations. After that, Erasmus kissed Torvald's toe, then ankle, his curls brushing against Torvald's firm calf muscle. Damon looked at Laurent, who had simply let all of this unfold before him. He could see what had made Torvald transfer his affections. There was a superficial resemblance between the prince and the slave. Erasmus's fair skin and burnished hair were the closest thing in the room to Laurent's gold and ivory coloring. But Erasmus had something Laurent lacked, a vulnerability, a need for caring, and a yearning to be mastered that was almost palpable. In Laurent there was only a patrician coolness, and if the purity of Laurent's profile drew the eye, Damon had the scars on his back to prove that one could look, but not touch. "You planned this," said Nicaise. His low voice was a hiss. "You wanted him to see. You tricked me." In the same voice a lover might have said. How could you? Except there was anger there, too. And spite. "You had a choice," said Laurent. "You didn't have to show me your claws." "You tricked me," said Nicaise. "I'm going to tell—" "Tell him," said Laurent. "All about what I've done and how you helped me. How do you think he'll react? Shall we find out? Let's go together." Nicaise gave Laurent a look that was desperately, spitefully calculating. "Oh, will you—" "Enough," said Laurent. "Enough. You're learning. It won't be as easy to do next time." "I promise you it won't," said Nicaise venomously, and he left without, Damon noted, giving Laurent his earring. Ooh. That's another scene break, and we are arriving somewhat perfectly at 4 o'clock at the halfway point. So this will be where we take our break. We are on page 160, and where the heck is the bookmark? So I am going to take this break to compile the names for the giveaway. That was the one thing I forgot to mention. Today is when we actually give away this volume of Captive Prince, and I am going to get the names together over the break, and then we're going to, hit randomize, and the name at the top will be the winner. So please enjoy the Gaywatch break room as I figure out who wins the giveaway. Alrighty, we'll be back here in just a little bit. Welcome back. So, I have the list of everyone who entered into the giveaway right here in a little randomizer. I use random.org, just, there's just a little tidbit of information that you probably didn't care about. But I am going to hit randomize, and whoever's at the top is the winner. So, let us see here. I hope, oh, this is so funny. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Puka? Puka Penny is the winner. Puca. Maybe it's Pusa. Puka Penny. Pusa Penny. However you pronounce it. Me and the pronunciation's not doing great today. But you have won. You can contact me on Twitter or Bluesky. I technically still have a Twitter account. Or Bluesky. Or if you're a patron, you can hop over on the Patreon and slide me a DM. If you're on Tumblr, you can shoot me a private message over on Tumblr. Wherever you are the most comfortable with communicating. I am britdia on Twitter, and Bluesky is just Gaywatch. Tumblr is just Gaywatch. And then, of course, there's the Patreon. Go ahead and give me contact, and we will swap, get addresses, and I will be sending you this beautiful copy of Captive Prince. So, congratulations. It's a really lovely cover. I'm really a big fan of the new covers that it has gotten. I say new. They're relatively new to me. I don't know if they've been around for years, but I feel like they only came about like in the past 6 months or more. And they're stunning. So, congratulations. Way to win. We will be giving away another copy of this volume in particular as we read the second book, and then we'll be giving away the whole trilogy of these covers. Of these covers, as I drop the bookmark again, of these covers when we get to the third book. So there's plenty of giveaways going on because people are incredibly generous. Woo! We are on page 160 at the scene break. Speaking of covers, though, if you want to Google, if you've already read the trilogy, give the Japanese covers a Google. Trust me, they are wild. They are pretty fantastic. They're some of the most Japanese things I've ever seen in my entire life. Anyway. Fed, sated, and entertained, the court dispersed and the council and regent sat down and began negotiations. When the regent called for wine, it was Ansel who poured it, and when he was done, Ansel was invited to sit beside the regent, which he did, very decoratively, with a well-pleased expression on his face. Damon had to smile. He supposed that he couldn't blame Ansel for ambition, and it wasn't a bad achievement for an 18-year-old boy. There were courtiers aplenty in Damon's homeland who would consider it the height of accomplishment to attain a king's bed, the more so if it was a position of any permanence. Ansel was not the only one to have gotten what he wanted tonight. Laurent had delivered all Damon had asked for, tied up neatly in a bow, all within the space of a day. If you put everything else aside, you had to admire it for sheer organizational efficiency. If you did not put everything else aside, you recalled that this was Laurent, and that he had lied and cheated in order to bring this about. You thought about Erasmus, dragged through a night of horrors, and about what it meant for an adult to trick and use a boy who, for all he soundly deserved it, was still only 13. "It's done," said Laurent, who had come to stand beside him. Laurent seemed, bizarrely, to be in a good mood. He leaned a shoulder rather casually against the wall. His voice was not exactly warm, but nor was the ice edge polished to cut. "I've arranged for Torvald to meet with you later to discuss the transportation of the slaves. Did you know that Castor sent them to us without any handlers from Achielos? I thought you and Torvald would have other plans." It just came out. Laurent said, "No." Damon realized that he was pushing at the limits of Laurent's good mood, so he said, not without difficulty, "I don't know why you did any of this, but I think the others will be treated well in Bazal. Thank you." "You are permanently disgusted by us, aren't you?" said Laurent. And then, before Damon could speak, "Don't answer that question. Something made you smile earlier. What was it?" "It was nothing. Ansel," said Damon. "He's finally found the royal patronage he was looking for." Laurent followed his gaze. He calmly appraised the way that Ansel leaned in to pour wine, the way that the regent's ringed fingers lifted to trace the line of Ansel's cheek. "No," said Laurent, without much interest. "That's done for appearance's sake only. I think not all the practices of this court would meet with the approval of Torvald's delegation. What do you mean? Laurent detached his gaze from the regent and turned it back on Damon, his blue eyes showing neither his usual hostility nor arrogance nor contempt, but instead something that Damon could not make out at all. I warned you about Nicaise because he is not Councillor Audin's pet. Haven't you guessed whose pet he is? Laurent said, and then, when he didn't answer, Ansel is too old to interest my uncle. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page 163 for chapter 9. Yeah. I've been waiting. I've been waiting for this reveal in a big way. Because now, in many ways, we can actually have conversations about the regent. We can start to have actual conversations about the regent. Whew. In case, because a couple of people might be a little confused, and if you're hopping in and out of the stream, you may also be confused. Nicaise, who is 13 and has been at court, quote unquote, for 3 years, is not Councillor Audin's pet. He is the regent's pet. Which explains a lot of Nicaise's behavior, actually. The entitlement, why he's out on his own, like, a lot. It explains a lot about not just the way Nicaise is, but also, like, the certain privileges he seems to have. And the way he can just throw his words around a lot more than other pets. I said it before, but I'll say it again. We're on page 163 for chapter 9. Damn. I know, it's so funny, Henry. Like, you had assumed this about the regent. The first time I read it, I was, like, stunned. Because we generally have at least a softer view of the regent up until now than we do of Laurent. The regent has been painted as, while conniving, obviously, and while certainly, like, just very exacting, is still more of a guy trying to make do with a very difficult nephew type of situation, who still commanded, you know, a certain amount of respectability up until now. And so the first time I read this, I was like, stunned. I could not believe. And similarly, Damon even said earlier in the chapter, very cleverly, C.S. Picard, I see you. He just mentioned casually about how he respected the regent. And he would even, like, you know, he would prefer to be in the regent's camp than Laurent's camp, because at least the regent seemed to have, you know, the regent hasn't been the one abusing him this whole time. The regent is the one who seems to command a certain air of, but no. Not even remotely. Not even a little bit. Not at all. He was taken to see Torvald in the early morning, after a long interview with 2 patron's servants, in which he dredged up all the knowledge he had regarding the treatment of slaves. Some of the questions he was asked, he had no idea how to answer. Others he was more comfortable with. Were they trained in patron protocols, and which guests could they be expected to entertain? Yes, they had language and protocol training in patron, as well as Vascian, though perhaps not the provincial dialects. And of course, they knew all that was needed of Achielos and Isthema. Not ver, he heard himself saying. No one had ever believed there would be a treaty or an exchange. Torvald's rooms resembled Laurent's, though they were smaller. Torvald came out of the bedchamber looking well rested, wearing only pants and an overrobe. It fell straight to the ground on either side of his body, revealing a well-defined chest, lightly haired. Through the archway, Damon could see the tumble of milky limbs on the bed and the burnished head. Just for a moment, he remembered Torvald making love to Laurent on the balcony, but the hair was a shade too dark and curled. Making love being used here in the old school sense, where making love used to be shorthand for just flirting, courting, so to speak. He's sleeping, said Torvald. He spoke in a low voice, so as not to disturb Erasmus. He motioned Damon towards a table where they both sat. Torvald's robes settled in folds of heavy silk. We have not yet, Torvald said, and there was a silence. Damon had grown so used to explicit Varetian talk that he waited in the silence for Torvald to say what he meant. It took him a moment to realize that this silence said all that was needed to a patron. Torvald said, he is very willing, but I suspect there has been some mistreatment, not only the branding. I brought you here because I wanted to ask you the extent of it. I am concerned that I will inadvertently... Another silence. Torvald's eyes were dark. I think it would help for me to know. We already liked Torvald, all right? We already liked him. But, like, the superiorness of Torvald. And now that he's been placed in Erasmus's purview, like, you fucking love to see it. Damon thought, this is fair, and there is no delicate patron way to describe the things that happen here. He was being trained as a personal slave for the Prince of Achielos, said Damon. It's likely that he was a virgin before he arrived in Ver, but not after. I see. I don't know the extent of it, said Damon. You don't need to say more. It's as I thought, said Torvald. Well, I thank you for your candor and for your work this morning. I understand it's customary to give pets a gift after they perform a service. Torvald gave him a considering look. You don't look like the type for jewelry. Damon, smiling a little, said, No, thank you. Is there something else I can offer you? He thought about it. There was something he wanted, very badly. It was dangerous to ask. The grain of the table was dark, and only the edge was carved. The rest was a smooth, plain surface. You were in Achielos. You were there after the funeral ceremonies. Yes, that's right. What happened to the prince's household after his death? Oh, that is what a terrible question. Asking what happened to his household? Jeez. I assume it was disbanded. I hear that his personal slaves slit their own throats from grief. I don't know anything more. From grief, said Damon, remembering the ringing of swords and his own surprise, the surprise that had meant he had not understood what was happening until it was too late. Castor was furious. The keeper of the royal slaves was executed for letting it happen, and several of the guard. Yes, he had warned Adrastus. Castor would have wanted the evidence of what he had done blotted out. Adrastus, the guards, probably even the yellow-haired slave who had tended him in the baths, everyone who knew the truth, systematically, would have been killed. Almost everyone. Damon took a steadying breath. He knew, with every locked-down particle in his body, that he shouldn't let himself ask, and yet he couldn't help it. And Jocasta? Damon said. He said her name as he would have said it to her, without a title. Torvald gazed at him speculatively. Castor's mistress. She was in good health. The pregnancy is proceeding without incident. You didn't know. She carries Castor's child. Whether there will be a wedding or not is still in question, but certainly it's in Castor's interest to secure the succession. He gives every indication that he will raise the child as his heir, said Damon. It would have been her price. He remembered every perfect coil of her hair, like winding silk. Close those doors. He looked up. And suddenly he was aware, from the way Torvald was looking back at him, that he had lingered on this topic too long. You know, said Torvald, slowly, You resemble Castor a little. It's something in the eyes, in the shape of the face. The more I look at you... No. The more I see it. Has anyone ever... No. Remarked on it before? I'm sure Laurent would... No, said Damon. It came out sounding too loud and too urgent. His heartbeat was loud in his chest as he was dragged from thoughts of home back to this deception. He knew that the only thing standing between himself and discovery at this moment was the sheer audacity of what Castor had done. A right-minded man like Torvald would never guess at this kind of brazen, inventive treachery. Forgive me. I meant to say that I hope you won't tell the prince you think I look like Castor. He wouldn't be pleased by the comparison at all. It wasn't a lie. Laurent's mind would have no trouble jumping from clue to answer. Laurent was too close to guessing the truth already. He has no love for the Echielin royal family. He should say something about being flattered to hear there was a likeness, but he knew he wasn't going to be able to get his mouth around the words. For the moment, at least, it distracted Torvald. Laurent's feelings about Achielos are too well known, Torvald said, with a troubled look. I've tried to talk to him about it. I'm not surprised he wanted those slaves gone from the palace. If I were Laurent, I'd be suspicious of any gift from Achielos. With conflict brewing among the Cairoi, the last thing Castor can afford is a hostile neighbor on this northern border. The regent is open to friendship with Achielos, but Laurent... It would be in Castor's interests to keep Laurent off the throne. Trying to imagine Castor plotting against Laurent was like trying to imagine a wolf plotting against a serpent. I think the prince can hold his own, said Damon, dryly. Yes, you could be right. He has a rare mind. Torvald rose as he spoke, indicating that the interview was done. In the same moment, Damon became aware that there were signs of stirring from the bed. I'm looking forward to a renewed relationship with Vere after his ascension. Because he's bewitched you, Damon thought. Because you're moonstruck and you have no idea of his nature. You can tell him I said that if you like. Oh, and tell him I'm looking forward to beating him to the mark today, said Torvald with a grin, and Damon made his way out. Scene break. Ooh, just dropping Jocasta being pregnant. Just right in there. Yeah. Oh, so casually. Damon, thankfully for his sense of self-preservation, had no chance to tell Laurent anything of the kind, but instead was thrust into a change of clothing. He was to be taken out to accompany the prince. He didn't have to ask, accompany him where? It was Torvald's last day, and Torvald was well known for his enjoyment of the hunt. The real sport was in Chastillon. It was too far to go in a day, and there were some reasonable runs in the lightly wooded lands around Arles. So, only slightly the worse for wine the night before. Half the court picked itself up around mid-morning and moved outside. Damon was transported, ridiculously, on a litter, as were Erasmus and a few of the wispier pets. Their role was not to participate, but to attend their masters after the sport was done. Damon and Erasmus both were bound for the royal tent. Until the patron delegation departed, Damon was unable to attempt escape. He couldn't even use the outing as a chance to see the city of Arles and its environs. The litter was covered. He did have a very good view of a series of figures copulating, which was the scene embroidered on the inside of the silk cover. The nobility were hunting boar, which the Venetians called sanglier. Ooh, it might be sanglier. A northern breed that was larger, with longer tusks on the male. A stream of servants, up before dawn, or perhaps even working through the night, had brought all of the opulence of the palace outside, erecting tented pavilions, richly colored and covered in pennants and flags. There were a great deal of refreshments served by attractive pages. The horses were beribboned and their saddles encrusted with precious stones. This was hunting with every leather exquisitely polished, every pillow plumped, and every need met. But despite all the luxury, it was still a dangerous sport. A boar was more intelligent than a deer or even a hare, which would run until it escaped or was overcome. A boar, fearsome, furious, and aggressive, would occasionally turn and fight. They arrived, rested, lunched. The party mounted. The beaters fanned out. To Damon's surprise, there were one or two pets among the riders milling about. He saw Talik on a horse alongside Vance, and riding very neatly indeed on a pretty strawberry roan was Ansel, accompanying his master, Berenger. Inside the tent there was no sign whatsoever of Nicaise. The regent was writing, but the child pet had been left behind. Laurent's words last night had been a shock. It was hard to reconcile what he now knew with the manner and the bearing of the man. The regent gave no sign of his tastes. Damon might almost have thought Laurent was lying. Except he could see in Nicaise's actions all the ways it was true. Who but the regent's pet would behave as brazenly as Nicaise did in the company of princes? Exactly what I said. Considering Nicaise's loyalties, it was strange that Laurent had seemed drawn to him, had seemed even oddly to like him. But who knew what went on in that maze of a mind? There was nothing to do but watch while the riders mounted and waited for the first signal of game. Damon wandered over to the mouth of the tent and looked out. The hunting party, sunlit, spanned the hill, flashing with jewels and polished saddlery. The two princes were mounted alongside one another, close by the tent. Torvald looked powerful and competent. Laurent, dressed in black hunting leathers, was an even more austere sight than normal. He was riding a bay mare. She was a beautiful mount, with perfectly balanced proportions and long hips made for hunting, but she was fractious and difficult, already covered in a thin sheen of sweat. It gave Laurent, controlling her under a light rein, a chance to show off his seat, which was excellent. But it was show without substance. The hunt, like the art of war, required strength, stamina, and skill with a weapon, but more important than all three was a calm horse. Dogs wove their way through the legs of the horses. They were trained to be calm around large animals, trained to ignore hares and foxes and deer, and focus on nothing but sanglier. Laurent's fussy horse began acting out again, and he leaned forward in the saddle, murmuring something as he stroked her neck, in an uncharacteristically gentle gesture to quiet her. Then he looked up at Damon. It was wasteful of nature to have bestowed those looks on one whose character was so unpleasant. Laurent's fair skin and blue eyes were a combination that was rare in Patris, rarer in Achielos, and a particular weakness of Damon's. The golden hair made it worse. "Can't afford a good horse," said Damon. "Try to keep up," said Laurent. He said it to Torvald, after a chilly look at Damon. A touch of his heels, and his mount moved out like she was part of him. Torvald, who was grinning, followed. In the distance, a horn blew, announcing game. The riders kicked their mounts, and the whole party streamed toward the sound of the horn. Hooves thundered after the baying of hounds. The terrain was only lightly wooded, with trees scattered here and there. A large party could canter. There was a clear view of the dogs and the front runners, who were approaching a more heavily wooded area. The boar was somewhere under the cover. It was not long before the party was out of sight, through the trees, over the crest of a hill. Another scene break. Whew. Like, when the worst person you know is hot as fuck, that's just unfair. Oh yeah, Wayfarer in Japan, get used to the Damon likes blondes and blue-eyed people thing. Oh yeah, that's a running theme throughout all three books. Damon has a type. Inside the royal tent. Oh no, he's hot. Yes, Kem. That's exactly what it is. Oh god, he's hot. Oh no. Inside the royal tent, servants were clearing away the last of the luncheon, which had been eaten reclining on strewn cushions, the occasional hound wandering in, only to be pushed good-naturedly off the cloths. Erasmus was like an exotic ornament, kneeling obediently on a cushion the color of yellow apples. He had done a beautifully unobtrusive job of serving Torvald at lunch, and later in arranging his riding leathers. He was wearing a short tunic in patron style that exposed his arms and legs, yet was long enough to cover his scarring. Re-entering the tent, Damon looked nowhere else. Erasmus looked down and tried not to smile, and instead blushed, slowly and thoroughly. "Hello," said Damon. "I know that you've somehow arranged this," said Erasmus. He was incapable of hiding what he felt and just seemed to radiate embarrassed happiness. "You kept your promise, you and your master." "I told you he was kind," Erasmus said. "You did," said Damon. He was pleased to see Erasmus happy, Whatever Erasmus believed about Laurent, Damon wasn't going to dissuade him. He's even nicer in person. Did you know he came and talked to me? Said Erasmus. He did, said Damon. It was something he couldn't imagine. He asked about what happened in the gardens. Then he warned me about last night. He warned you, said Damon. He said that Nicaise would make me perform before the court, and it would be awful, but that if I was brave, something good might come at the end of it. Erasmus looked up at Damon curiously. Why do you look surprised? I don't know. I shouldn't be. He likes to plan things in advance, said Damon. He wouldn't have even known about someone like me if you hadn't asked him to help me, said Erasmus. He's a prince. His life is so important. So many people must want him to do things for them. I'm glad I have this chance to say thank you. If there is a way to repay you, I will find it. I swear that I will. There's no need. Your happiness is repayment enough. And what about you? Said Erasmus. Won't you be lonely all by yourself? I have a kind master, said Damon. He did pretty well in getting the words out, all things considered. Erasmus bit his lip, and all his burnished curls fell over his forehead. You're in love with him? Not quite, said Damon. There was a moment of silence. It was Erasmus who broke it. I was always taught that a slave's duty was sacred, that we honored our masters through submission, and they honored us in return. And I believed that. But when you said that you were sent here as punishment, I understood that for men here there is no honor in obedience, and it is shameful to be a slave. Perhaps I had already started to understand that even before you spoke to me. I tried to tell myself that it was an even greater submission to become nothing, to have no value, but I couldn't. I think it is in my nature to submit, as it is not in yours, but I need someone to belong to. You have someone, said Damon. Slaves are prized in Patras. And Torvald is smitten with you. I like him, said Erasmus shyly, blushing. I like his eyes. I think he's handsome. And then he blushed again at his own boldness. More handsome than the Prince of Achelous, Damon teased. Well, I never saw him, but I really don't think he could be more handsome than my master, said Erasmus. Torvald wouldn't tell you this himself, but he's a great man, said Damon, smiling, even among princes. He spent most of his life in the north, fighting on the border with Vask. He's the man who finally brokered the peace between Vask and Patras. He's King Torgir's most loyal servant, as well as his brother. Another kingdom. In Achelous, none of us thought we'd ever leave the palace. I'm sorry that you'll have to be uprooted again, but it won't be like last time. You can look forward to the journey. Yes, that is, I will be a little frightened, but so obedient, said Erasmus, and blushed again. He needs to be protected. He so needs to be protected. You know what he reminds me of? That's a scene break, by the way. You know what he reminds me of? Erasmus reminds me of a ragdoll cat. And if you've never had a ragdoll cat, the thing about ragdolls is that, you're generally not supposed to really let cats wander outside anyway. Outdoor cats is not great for a lot of reasons, both for the cat and then for the outdoors. But especially, you were specifically told about ragdolls, don't let them go outside. They will get eaten. And it's because they just roll over. They have never met anything that's not a friend, even that snarling dog. They have no self-defense instincts. They have no nothing. They will just roll over and show their belly. They are the sweetest, most submissive things. Erasmus is a ragdoll, and he should be protected. You know what's funny? I legitimately, Breezy, who asked if Erasmus comes back, I legitimately can't remember. I do not remember at all if Erasmus comes back. The first to return were the foot huntsmen and the dog handlers from the first station, who were bringing back a set of exhausted hounds, having released a second fresh set as the riders swept past. To them also fell the job of destroying any dogs that were wounded past recovery by the sharp-tusked boar. There was a strange atmosphere among them, not only the heavy, tongue-lolling fatigue of the hounds. It was something in the faces of the men. Damon felt a twist of unease. Boar hunting was a dangerous sport. At the mouth of the tent, he called to one of them. "Has something happened?" The dogsman said, "Tread lightly. Your master's in a vicious mood." Well, that was order restored. "Let me guess. Someone else brought down the boar." "No, he did," said the dogsman, a sour note in his voice. "He ruined his horse to do it. She never had a chance. Even before he rode her into the fight that shattered her rear ankle, she was blood from flank to shoulder from the spur." He pointed his chin at Damon's back. "You'd know something about that," he said. Damon stared at him, suddenly feeling faintly nauseated. "She was a brave goer," he said. "The other one, Prince Auguste. Oh, sorry. Auguste, I believe. He was a great one with horses. He helped break her in as a filly." It was as close as any man of his station would come to criticizing a prince. One of the other men, eyeing them, approached a moment later. "Don't mind Jean, he's in a foul mood. He was the one who had to stick a sword through the mare's throat and put her down. The prince tore strips off him for not doing it fast enough." When the riders returned, Laurent was riding a well-muscled gray gelding, which meant that somewhere in the hunting party, a courtier was riding double. The regent came first into the tent, stripping off his riding gloves, his weapon taken by a servant. Outside there was a sudden baying. The boar had arrived and was likely being stripped down, its belly skin cut open and all the internal organs taken out, the offal given to the dogs. "Nephew," said the regent. Laurent had come with soft, patting grace into the tent. There was an aseptic lack of expression in the cool blue eyes, and it was very clear that vicious mood was an understatement. The regent said, "Your brother never had any difficulty running down a mark without slaughtering his horse, but we aren't going to talk about that." "Aren't we?" said Laurent. "Nicaise tells me you influenced Torvald to bargain for the slaves. Why do it in secret?" said the regent. His gaze tracked over Laurent slowly and consideringly. "I suppose the real question is, what motivated you to do it at all?" "I thought it was terribly unfair of you," drawled Laurent, "to burn the skin of your slaves when you would not let me flay mine even a little." Damon felt all the breath leave his body. The regent's expression changed. "I see you can't be talked to. I won't indulge your current mood. Petulance is ugly in a child and worse in a man. If you break your toys, it is no one's fault but your own." The regent left through the folded tent flaps that were held open by red silk ropes. From outside there came voices in the chink of saddlery and all the milling hubbub of a hunting party, and nearer too was the sound of the tent canvases flapping in the wind. Laurent's blue eyes were on him. "Something to say?" said Laurent. "I heard you killed your horse." "It's just a horse," said Laurent. "I'll have my uncle buy me a new one." These words seemed savagely to amuse him. There was a jagged private edge to his voice. Damon thought, "Tomorrow morning Torvald departs, and I am once again free to try and leave this sickening, treacherous, overripe place, however I can." That's another scene break. The utter impatience for the regent's presence now is beautiful, by the way. The chance came 2 nights later, though not in any way that he had anticipated. Woken in the dead of night, torches flaring and the doors to his room flung open. Can I read today? Lord. He was expecting it to be Laurent. When it came to these nocturnal visits, these abrupt awakenings, it was always Laurent. But he saw only 2 men in livery, the prince's livery. He didn't recognize the men. "You've been sent for," one said, unlocking his chain from the floor and giving it a tug. "Sent where?" "The prince," said the one. "Wants you in his bed." "What?" said Damon, bringing up short so that the chain pulled taut. He felt a sharp push from behind. "Get a move on. Don't want to keep him waiting." But digging his heels in after the push. "Move it." He took a step forward, still resisting. Another. It was going to be a slow journey. The man behind him swore. "Half the guard is hot to fuck him. You'd think you'd be happier about the idea." The prince doesn't want me to fuck him, said Damon. Will you move it? The man behind him said, and Damon felt the prick of a knife point behind him, and he let himself be taken out of the room. Oh, damn. Oh, damn. That's the end of the chapter, and should technically be where, oh, fuck, yeah, there's no scene breaks in chapter 10. Damn. Otherwise, I'd read to the next scene break. There's been plenty of scene breaks the whole time. But now we land on a particularly cruel cliffhanger, and I can't even get into the next thing because there are 0 scene breaks in chapter 10. So we've got to leave this on a cliffhanger. Damn. Oh, shit. It's page 179 for chapter 10, by the way. Shit. Some stuff learned today. Jocasta is pregnant. Nicaise belongs to the regent. Erasmus finds someone who will treat him well, and we love to see it. A poor horse has been killed in the process. Just some things are happening. Oh yeah, that's an especially cruel cliffhanger for a Thursday. That's right. Woo. Shit. Yeah, we are now a little over halfway. I think actually we may only have 2 streams left. Yeah. There are only 2 streams left before the end of the first book. So we'll be finishing the first book of Captive Prince next Thursday. By next Thursday. That's when the first book will be done. And like, wow. I kind of marvel at how there's so much in this book for it being on average shorter than your usual fare. And even though it's not fantasy, it is what's called like second world historical, and that it's a historical story, but it's not taking place like on Earth in 1100 whatever. It's an entirely different world still. So like it's not fantasy, but there's still a lot of world building that has to come with introducing entirely new, countries and courts and contexts and politics and all that jazz. So you'd think it'd be longer, but it's not. And since it's not longer, you'd think that it would be skimping on building out a realistic feeling world and getting the sense that there are larger machinations and there are countries at work and all of that. You'd think you wouldn't really get that. And yet she's freakish. And she did. Somehow. We don't really know how. A lot of it might come down to her rather efficient yet evocative prose. She's able to do a lot without needing a lot to do it. And that's mind-blowing to me because, I always need 20 words to explain a 3-word concept. I am overly wordy all the time. Yes, the different cultures feel really distinct as well. And even though like the 2 main ones that we hear about, so Ver and Achielos, even though it's very clear Ver is inspired by France, Achielos is very Greek, very ancient Greece type of thing, there's still enough differences to make it distinct. And then also like, I don't know, there are plenty of times when you read something and you see, oh, this is obviously France. This is supposed to be France, just like Ver. Like, this is supposed to be France, but it's not because we're in a different world. But we all know it's supposed to be France. And yet, for some reason, it doesn't feel like just a lazy copy-paste about it, even though it's very obviously France or inspired by France. And it just never really bothered me, where it has bothered me in other places, where it really feels like a rather slapdash choice. That might be part of it. It feels very, very deliberate. I do love her decisions to take the main inspiration of France and Greek. Seeing those two countries interact, those two coded, obviously, countries interact, and those two different culture types interact, also mixed in with original stuff as well. Because, like, all of the, to my knowledge, all of, like, the sexual politics and the sexual handling of, you know, pets and slaves and just the sexual dynamics of what's acceptable and what's not, all of that is unique to the book. All of that is new. So, I don't know, she blended a very, very clear and stark inspiration with still a lot of effort and work to choose two rather unique countries that we're not familiar with seeing collide, and then embedding it with her own original work and what the story needs in order to feel more organic than just, this is France and this is Greece, you know? I have 1,000 Autumns on my shelf. You guys have sent them to me. And it's like, I think the two left that are already on my shelf that I haven't read. I think the two series left are 1,000 Autumns and Stars of Chaos, I believe. Those are the ones there. I want to say there might be a third, but honestly, I don't think so. I'll check, but I don't think so. So those are already on my shelf. Those are definitely happening. They'll just go in the next vote. But I hear great things, obviously, about both of them. Oh, Henry, are you from Greece? Are you Greek? I would love to get your thoughts about Achielos and how it is so very clearly Greek. Yeah, Laurent warning Erasmus beforehand. Laurent's the mystery. We know he has umpteen different motivations, but we don't really know what most of them are, and we don't really know much about him or anything like that. So it's like all we have to go on are his actions and then sometimes the apparent subtext to his actions. And he makes a really interesting just combination of things. You don't really know where to put him. He's incredibly vicious, not just verbally, but then also in cruelty towards Damon. He's very vicious. He's very cruel. He has this weird sort of competitive dynamic with Nicaise. He warns Erasmus what's going to happen before it happens, even though technically it would have been more effective, so to speak, to not tell Erasmus to guarantee a genuine reaction in the moment so that it works. It would have behooved him more, arguably, to not tell Erasmus, but he did. And he has now brought about this machination to put Erasmus in better hands. At the request of Damon, there's just so many things swirling around that make Laurent a really, really interesting puzzle. Laurent contains multitudes. Well said. Yes, he contains multitudes. I've actually never heard of Wayfarer. I've actually never heard of Ballad of Sword and Wine. Although that might be a lie. It might be vaguely familiar. I'm going to write that down, though. Oh, yeah, Jamie. Laurent's entire existence is also built around keeping people guessing. He's so shifty on purpose, which just makes it even more difficult to try to get a read on him. Which is a big draw, Blue Turnips, absolutely. Trying to figure out what the hell the problem with Laurent, like what's Laurent's deal, is like a huge draw of of Act 1 of the story. It's a huge draw through the whole thing, actually, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it does hold up really, really well. You kind of really can't knock it down. I've read it, several times, and then coming back even after a few years. The one thing I was kind of worried about, if anything, even though I knew I loved this series, was I was like, God, that would suck if it wound up to not really hold up in 2025, considering this came out in around 2016, I believe. It was published online first, and then got a huge following before it got published, I believe is the history of that. So I was like, this would suck if it didn't really hold up in one way or another, but it holds up really, really well. There are some things about it, I think it's just more in the nature of types of stories like this from a queer romance perspective have become much more common and have been explored to a much greater degree than there had been at 2016. So there is kind of the sense to remember that all of this stuff was rather surprising in 2016. Getting something like this at that time was much more of a distinctive moment than, say, if it came out today. But it has survived for a reason. We're reading it today, and the fandom exists today, and it hasn't gone anywhere for so much time for a reason. And it's because, thankfully, it holds up really well. Like, geez. Oh, yeah, it's also... The Captive Prince is a masterclass in a lot of things. Damn near everything, if I remember correctly. But trilogies... We will get into that. This is there's a reason I've studied it, right? This is an excellent blueprint for trilogies, for hate to love, for so many things. Just I can't speak to it enough, obviously. Otherwise we wouldn't be here. It is. There are plenty of romance books that you could break down if you're trying to learn how to build a romantic arc. Doesn't even necessarily have to be one that follows the story and the tropes and the arc that this does. But this is just at its core, fundamentally, an extremely well plotted and well paced romance story. And it would behoove anybody who is trying to learn how to write romance to break this down and really examine why it works so well in every respect. Also just an overall plot and world building and everything else as well. But, obviously the romance is the forefront of the story as the whole. So, and it's also like the thing about the first book, and the thing that compelled me to continue to read the second and the third one, because I was not used to reading books like this when I first picked up Captive Prince. So it was a little outside of my comfort zone in a lot of ways, but I was really compelled by it. So by the time we get to, the end of the book, I'm looking at this and I'm going, fucking how? How is this a romance? How does anyone turn this around to become a romance? And that was one of the biggest questions that propelled me to finish the trilogy. Because I was like, how do you turn this boat around? Like, it just blew my mind. And so this was one of the first stories I ever read in which I fully and wholeheartedly agreed that the turnaround is exceptionally well done. But you're supposed to be looking at this first book and going, how the fuck? That's by design. That kind of, I don't want to say repulsion, but that skepticism, that doubt is supposed to be by design, which in 2016 was really risky, considering that there are still issues around depicted sexual assault being framed as other things in queer romances in certain places, but it was much more prevalent back then. So you can understand why this made people nervous and why a lot of people turned off of the first book. Because it was a bit of a different climate when it came to stuff like that back then. And it's amazing that the book found legs, that the story found legs in the climate that it did, because we were all very, very aware that there was a weird prevalence of romanticized assault. Jamie, yeah. I would go even so far to say as book 1 is not a romance. Not really. It's just not. Yeah. Which is a gutsy thing to do when you're like, I'm going to write a romantic trilogy. That's ballsy. Like, whew. Damn. So, it is now a little bit past 5. We finished a little bit early, but I really didn't want to get into... I would rather the cliffhanger than only partially getting into everything that comes, I think, in chapter 10. So, because that would have been worse. That would have been so much worse. So, it's Thursday. I see you guys next Tuesday. So I will see you on Tuesday for chapter 10 and more of Captive Prince. And I hope the week is treating you well. I hope you have a lovely weekend. I'm very excited to get to the rest of this volume next week, which feels a little bit fake, but that's just because I've been reading Dan May. And so when it takes 2 months to finish one volume, this goes by very, very quickly, but so well. I will see you guys next Tuesday at 3 p.m. I read gay things Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I also do a little bit of a warm-up beforehand at 2:15, reading what has turned out to be rather wild romance novels with some things happening beforehand, and that's available to patrons and to YouTube channel members. I think that's it. I think I have to see you on Tuesday. I kind of really don't want to go because I really want to keep reading, so I'm delaying as much as possible. But I have to go. I love you very, very much. Please take care of yourselves, and I will see you on Tuesday for more Captive Prince.